Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Extra Point. I am your host, Roland Rainey, CEO of R2 Sports Management, and welcome to episode 7 of The Extra Point. As always, I'm extremely excited to be joined by my fellow colleagues coming out of Indiana, Jeremy Coleman. How are we doing today, Jeremy?
Doing good, Roland. Ready to talk some football.
Hey, talk football is what we are good at. Also coming out of New Jersey, we got Robert Parker. How we doing, Robert?
How's it going, Roland? Ready to get started?
All right, man. Great seeing you. And everyone, as I've said multiple times, coming out of the great state of New York, it is Justice Gordon. How we doing, Justice?
Doing great today. Ready to get into it.
All right, man. Great to have you. And this is an exciting time for R2 Sports Management because this episode 7, is coming to you live out of the office of R2 Sports Management, which is located in Colorado Springs, out of the Citadel Terrace offices. Beyond excited for the opportunity to do this. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Right now, there is a lot going on, not just across the country or the globe, I should say, when it comes to this pandemic that we're all encountering. But of course, there's always the second and third and fourth order effects about this particular pandemic and what is it causing. Specifically to the NFL, there's a lot of things going on. Right now, you're starting to see a slew of players who are opting out of this season. So I want to take the time in this episode to kind of clear the air a little bit so the fans and the listeners out there can truly understand what it means to opt out of the season when it comes to having this opportunity due to the pandemic. So, Robert, can you go ahead and help explain to the audience what opting out really means?
Yes, Roland. So when it comes to opting out of this year's season, it's two types of opt-outs. You have those players that's high risk for the COVID-19, and then you have those players who's just opting out. So the difference is the players that's high risk, that's opting out of the season, they're going to get a $350,000 pretty much opt-out, and that's like a stipend. And those are for the high-risk players. And for those players who are not at high risk, they're going to get a $150,000 stipend for opting out. So that's the differential for high-risk players versus the non-high-risk players. So we just have to throw that out there, that it is a difference between those players who are high risk to get infected with COVID-19 and those who are just opting out, who for personal reasons where they don't want to come home to their wife and kids or their newborn babies, Roland. So that is the difference for the audience out there who didn't know the difference between those opting out for health reasons and those opting out for personal reasons.
So having said that, Robert, and thanks for that great breakdown for the fans out there. When you talk about opting out, and especially if you're opting out due to a medical condition, do you have to provide that? I'm guessing through the league front office. Does that have to be represented via the NFLPA, your agent? Do you know the background about how that actually gets approved in the league?
Yes, Roland. So this is something that the NFL and the NFLPA came together and worked on. So you're going to have to get a waiver. I'm pretty sure majority of those guys that opted out for medical reasons had to get a waiver from either the team doctor, their personal doctor, and they went through the paperwork and the negotiated protocol to opt out. And then also you have to have, a reason. So just like I said earlier, you had those players who opt out for personal reasons. They get $150,000. And those people who've opted out, those players who opt out for, personal health reasons, get the $350,000 stipend. So that's going to be the difference between those type of players. but everything the protocol went to from the NFLPA and the NFL, Roland.
Gotcha. Thanks for that, Robert. So let's go out to Indiana. Jeremy, when you hear about players opting out, now I'm going to throw a slight twist on this comment. Now you're hearing political figures who are coming down with COVID. We just had a couple members in Congress who tested positive. And if you haven't heard the news about former presidential campaign, nominee out there, Herman Cain, he just passed away from COVID-19. So the uptick is definitely there, is real. Do we believe that more players are going to leave the league, or I shouldn't say leave the league, be careful here, basically opt out of this season because this uptick is definitely not something that's slowing down?
Well, there's definitely a few interesting things that go along with this opt-out for this season. Obviously, players want to keep their family and themselves safe. Players want to keep their family. So the other thing is, while these players are young and in the best shapes of their lives and can probably beat the disease, the other thing you have to see is the coaches. You got coaches that are older in the league. They might not be able to combat the disease is same as some of the young coaches in the league. There is an age disparity. That you've got legends that hang around the game forever that still coach. Dick LeBeau has hung around the game for decades now. Would he be at a higher risk if he was coaching right now? So that's something you have to consider too. Do the players want to get their coaches sick potentially? I'm sure that's something the NFL and the Coaches Association has worked out as well. But on top of that, I think there's a few contractually interesting things about the opt-out. So if you're a free agent going into next year, you don't really want to opt out right now, because if you opt out right now, your contract will toll over to the next year, and you will not get that accrued season in the NFL. So you will not be a free agent if you opt out, from my understanding. So if you're looking for that payday, coming into next year, you are likely going to have to bet on yourself and your health that you're going to stay healthy and that you're going to play up to a level that's going to get you a nice size contract. So I think that's definitely part of it. And then honestly, I think one thing certain players, especially veteran players, need to kind of watch out for is if you do opt out of the season, there are a lot of young guys entering the league this year who very well could take your spot this year. And if that player performs particularly well, maybe the team decides to move on from your contract next year, even though your contract is fully guaranteed going into next year, even though it will toll next year. So I think there's a lot of different aspects of this that, these players like Donta Hightower, Patrick Chung, others who opted out have really had to think about and make an educated decision on whether it's the best decision for them.
No, that's a great point. And you kind of keyed in on the best decision for them. You highlighted the family factor. So I think this is one of those unique cases where, oftentimes in the NFL, players are on the road. They are, constantly away from their family. Same thing with the coaches and the executives. Now they're in a position where they have to take all of that into consideration and make a tough decision. So, Justice, when we're looking at the totality of this, do you believe we will get to a point, if enough star players came out and opted out, will that have any impact on the league moving forward? Or is it just going to provide an opportunity for a backup player to have an opportunity to shine?
Yeah, well, one thing I want on quickly is something that, obviously, COVID-19, it definitely does affect, weaker immune systems, a la people up in age. But I do want to highlight, a friend of mine. She's on the front lines, and she took to Facebook today. She was venting pretty much. Kind of complaining how people were taking this as a joke, and she gave a few examples about a bunch of people in the hospital. They're 20, 30 years old, and they're laid up in the hospital from this disease. This doesn't affect just older people. These players that decide to opt into the season and want to play, they could possibly die from this disease. It's very serious right now, and I have no problem with any player who wants to opt out. It's their decision. They got their families themselves to think about. But to your question, it's definitely a strong possibility if one of these veteran players, decide it's not worth it. I'm gonna sit out. I made enough money. I really don't need to play. Through all this craziness, it's definitely possible one of these young, hungry players can, take their spot. They're hungry. They want to make money, and it's definitely a decision. Veteran players have to make whether to sit out or not. But at the end of the day, it's up to them. Look out for yourselves. And if these veteran players want to sit out, man, I mean, I think we all just have to respect the decision.
No, I tell you, we've hit a variation of points when it comes to this. And I think what Roger Goodell and the rest of the executive staff, to include NFLPA, one of the things they are going to have to figure out is the impact, not just economic impact, but the impact to the game when it comes to putting players' health at risk. Now, I think when you hear that term, right, putting players' health at risk, and you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, they're playing the freaking sport of football. Their bodies and health is at risk every time they step on a practice field or every time they're in a weight room or when they're actually in a game. Do you actually, for any of you, do you think that there is a difference here when you look at how someone should look at these players from a sense of, hey, I'm opting out because I'm concerned about my health, even though they're playing a violent game where they can be injured, and a lot of people have been injured almost nearly every game. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think the fan perspective is different because they're so anxious for football to get back there. They're not always thinking about the players and their health and their best interest. We've been without sports now. Luckily the Major League Baseball started back up, NBA starting here. We're all hoping a return to normalcy here. But the fact is, when it comes to a person's health, your personal health, you do take your best interest at heart. So you've got to be able to put yourselves in the player's shoe and realize that they have to make that exact same decision. Fans have the luxury of sitting back, doing that Monday morning quarterback thing when it comes to decision making, as they're not the ones that have to make the decisions for the best of themselves and for the best of their families.
No, great point, especially in regards to making the best decision for the player and their families. But you brought up something, Jeremy, and I'm going to actually kind of cast this out at Robert, because, Robert, you mentioned something earlier in a private text that we had going on, and that was the NBA. So NBA has started up. What's your thoughts? How does it look? Did was it what you expected, or is it something that you think the NFL can learn
from? I think that the NBA right now, Roland, is looking awesome compared to any other major sports. We saw the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak in baseball with the Miami Marlins, and we've seen the Marlins postpone games. We've seen teams that the Marlins are supposed to play postpone games. So we've seen kind of like, what we didn't want to happen is happening in Major League Baseball. So I think the NBA is looking, really, really good compared to all the other leagues because they're actually in the bubble. And I think the bubble is the safest, opportunity that you can have competitive sports competition. Now, you can ask the question, where do the NFL should be in a bubble? I think that's a little hard. I think you just have too many players on the team. You have too much coaching staff. You have too many trainer and equipment managements to have all of that in the bubble. So I think the NFL is going to run into a problem later down the line where if they're going to be traveling to different states, for example, I'm out of New Jersey, right? So I'm kind of down the street from MetLife Stadium. I know our governor, Phil Murphy, put in a thing that says, hey, no fans is going to be at Giants and Jets games, right? So if you're a Giants player and you play the Miami Dolphins, where, Florida is a hot spot for the COVID-19 pandemic, if you're a player, do you want to travel to Miami? Or if you're a player, do you want to travel to, the state of Texas and play the Cowboys, where it's also the numbers are high? Or do you want to go to Arizona and play the Cardinals? So I think that's a big decision that the NFL and the NFLPA has to come to grips with. And they have to come to, the drawing board and say, hey, what is the best possible way that we can have a season to protect our players, our fans, and their families? And I think that's an ongoing discussion, if you ask me, Roland.
No, that's a great point. Jeremy, I see you shaking your head there. What do you want to add into that?
Well, I definitely agree with Robert saying that it's ongoing. I don't think there's anything set in place right now outside of the recent agreement that said we're allowing players to opt out. I don't think logistically anything has been handled when it comes to, because there's 32 different teams and 32 different ways teams travel. That's just how it is. Not everyone does the same thing. So maybe the NFL and the higher powers that be are going to have to come up for a uniform way for teams to travel. They've already agreed they're going to have a season, so they've already agreed to the risks a little bit here. And the other thing I want to mention real quick with the opt-out thing is, there's a kind of a deadline here of August 3rd for players to choose whether they do or not. They do not have an exorbitant amount of time. They've got a finite amount of time to make a very complex decision. So if you are waffling and you miss the date, you've signed up kind of saying I am going to travel with my team because I said I am going to play football this year. So, well, like Robert said, ongoing discussion, absolutely.
I tell you, this is probably just as one of the most flexible encounters that the NFL is really going to have to take on and shoulder. To both Robert and Jeremy's point, if I am a team and I'm getting ready to travel to my opponent, and let's say there is an uptick in that particular area, do we postpone that game? But even if you postpone the game, I mean, just because you postpone it doesn't mean that the uptick is going to slow down, right? So, do you move it to a location out of state? Do you try your best to put that game on the back end of the schedule? I think there's going to be some hurdles that the NFL is going to encounter, especially when traveling to various hot spots. And that was an excellent point that was brought up, is if I'm a player and I know I'm getting ready to travel to a hot spot and I have a family, I can't opt out now, right? So how do I go about this? How is the league going to protect me? So once again, we won't resolve this on the extra point, but I tell you, for the executives in the NFL, there's a lot that they are going to have to work through. So we will be on ready standby and ready to report to all of you out there the latest and greatest information. So let's go ahead and transition here. But as we are transitioning, I want to highlight again that you are listening to The Extra Point. I am your host, Roland Rainey, CEO of R2 Sports Management, and I'm joined today with my fellow colleagues, Robert Parker coming out of New Jersey, Justice Gordon coming out of New York, and Jeremy Coleman out of Indiana. Now, we're going to transition to a topic that I'm quite sure a lot of folks are going to be very interested in, especially those scouts that are out there. and that topic is the notion of the portal in the NCAA, this transfer portal. So I'm coming right to you, Jeremy, because you have had the collegiate staff stink on you. I think you have some knowledge about this. Why don't you go ahead and take the opportunity and educate our fans out there on this particular notion of this transfer portal?
Yeah, so it's still fairly new. It's still something that's kind of evolving here over the past year. My last year at Indiana, back in 2018, the transfer portal had just come out. There's been a litany of changes ever since. But basically, it allows a player to say, hey, I'm going to transfer and I'm going to try to take my talents to a better university. There's a multitude of reasons. A lot of reasons can be transferring closer to home. There's been some health concerns among parents, especially now, as you can imagine with COVID, you never know. But that has been a reason for a player to transfer. But I'd say one of the biggest reasons is playing time. There's only 22 starters, no matter how you toss it up. And if you're not playing and you think you can play, you're going to go to a place where you can get playing time and try to make your mark so you can potentially go to the league.
Right.
So when you enter the transfer portal, you put your name in the portal, and other schools can start to contact you about, recruiting you in a sense, again, to come to their university to play football for them. Now, sometimes it's an amicable split. The coaching staff at the university is okay with you going to look for another opportunity. Maybe you can transfer down to a MAC school and play more and make a bigger impact there. Or, sometimes a player will put their name in the portal and the school is kind of thrown off by that and they want them back. Past example I'll bring up was just this past offseason with Indiana football. I still follow Indiana football pretty closely. Was running back Samson James put his name in the transfer portal for 2 days because the strength and conditioning coach, Dave Ballou, and Dr. Rhea both got hired on at Alabama. And he was thinking, and both Coach Ballou had known Samson James since he was a kid. So they were both from the Indianapolis area. And that kind of threw Samson for a loop a little bit. Came in the portal thinking, oh, well, I'm going to go somewhere else because that's the guy who really strongly recruited me there. But, I think cooler heads prevailed. I think Indiana is still the best situation for him. He took his name out of the transfer portal, and Indiana's expecting a big season from him and Stevie Scott. So there's a lot of cool, different little nuances with the transfer portal that we're still working out.
Okay, so in that notion, I would assume that a lot of the players in the NCAA are aware of this portal. As you already mentioned, I'm quite sure these universities don't want them to transfer out. But as a scout, if I was tracking someone and all of a sudden they want to transfer and they're in this portal, how does that affect me? What's your guys' thoughts on that? What's the impact to a professional football scout who is really trying to assess talent, but yet this person is kind of caught up in this transfer portal mechanism? How does that work?
Well, Roland, I think kids entering the transfer portal, it makes the scout job a little bit harder. And the reason why I say that is because, for example, let's take JT Daniels, for example, quarterback out of USC. He's a 5-star quarterback. He goes to USC. He plays fairly well his freshman year, and then he ends up with a knee injury, and then he transfers out to Georgia, and he got a waiver to play right away for this year. So he's going to be in a quarterback competition with Jamie Newman. But with that said, if you're a scout and you're scouting and you're recruiting him and you're looking at him in the USC program, well, USC under Graham Harrell as the OC, they run a different offense than Georgia with Kirby Smart. So if you're a scout, you're saying, hey, I'm scouting and I'm recruiting this kid and I'm watching him under air raid attack. And then now he's in Georgia and he's, running a pro style offense, which is similar to the NFL for the most part. So I think as a scout, you have to put your scouting hat on and you have to do more of evaluation for these individuals that enter the transfer portal, Roland. So I think as a scout, you just really have to, grind tape and grind film to say, hey, this kid can not only play in a spread offense, but he can play in a pro style offense. And if JT Daniels fare well in Georgia, I think that just ups his draft stock on the next level, Roland.
So when I look at something like this, I immediately go to the notion that if I am not happy in my program, if I am not getting the playing time that I think I rightfully deserve, if I'm a junior or, a sophomore, getting ready to get into my junior year where I really want to shine, because that's when the eyes are really going to be on me as a scout, or these scouts are going to be really looking at me and assessing my talent. Could this become an issue? I know that the transfer program is still in its infant stages, but will this become an issue to where players now just are hopping all around and really a lot of these NCAA, a lot of these programs won't be able to really nail down a legitimate core group of players to help carry a program. As we've seen with the likes of Alabama and LSU and Georgia and some elements of Florida and Ohio, they have a core that tends to carry them for years on end. What do you think is going to happen here? What's your thoughts on this, Justice?
Yeah, Roland, I think you make a great point. I think we could see an historic year in 2021 in terms of the transfer portal with everything going on with COVID-19. I mean, just like Robert said, the NCAA just recently shut down all spring workouts for seniors who are looking to jump to college next year. And this could really, hurt scouts. If scouts go to these things to see how these players test, they see if they can live up to their speed, if they can, do certain things, how well they adjust to learning. And I think this NCAA rule where they shut down all these spring camps, it's really going to force a lot of transfers in 2021. I think, because with this being shut down, this prohibits college scouts to go and actually visit these prospects and these players, and this eliminates the coaches getting to meet the players, coming to their houses. It prohibits the player visiting the campus. There's been no access for these players. So you look down the line in 2021, these players, who didn't get to visit the campus and didn't get to meet the coaches in person, they could look back and, they might not be happy with the coaching staff because they didn't get a chance to meet them. And, they might not be happy with the coaches that's there because they didn't actually get to go see it. So I think in 2021, we could see a lot of transfers from players who look back on their decision and they just don't want to be there anymore. And, it's definitely, I think it could be definitely historic. There's going to be a lot of players, I think, in 2021 who are going to look to transfer out.
To your point, and I think it's an excellent point, and I'm going to actually take your point a step further. I think what this pandemic will do, and once we get past it, and I truly believe as a nation, at some point globally, we will get past this or come to learn to live with it. I think next year, one of the things you will see is a firmer relationship between the NFL, the NCAA, the NFLPA. Very often, those entities operate in their own sphere. They make business decisions for the betterment of their institute. But this is going to be one dynamic because of everything that's happened this year. It's going to force them to work as a collective unit to say, hey, let's keep an eye out on these transfers. Or, hey, when it comes to someone declaring eligible for the draft? What are going to be the impacts? For those who opted out this year, what is that going to do for next year? So forth and so on. So, maybe next year we might see this fusion of institutes really trying to put this thing back together and make sense of it. So once again, more to come. There's just a lot that is happening out there. And for any players or any fans out there who know of players who are thinking about this or didn't even know about this, you might want to tell them to go ahead and tune into the Extra Point, because this is where you get the information. I want to take the opportunity now to really hit the hammer. And that is, let's talk about the draft impact. But before we do that, once again, I want to take the opportunity for those who are listening in. You're listening into The Extra Point, the newest football talk show in the podcast community. I'm your host, Roland Rainey, CEO of R2 Sports Management, and I'm joined today by my colleagues that are spread out across the nation. We got Robert Parker coming out of New Jersey. We have Jeremy Coleman coming out of Indiana. And we have Justice Corden coming out of, should I say it, Justice? The great state of New York.
Go ahead, say it.
Look, we're here as professional scouts, bringing you the latest in the NFL and the NCAA. Now, in the midst of this pandemic, if there's enough positive tests and cases to where the NFL can no longer manage it accordingly, and they determine it's time to shut it down, what is going to be the impact to the NFL draft? Actually, we're going to come right back to you, Justice. What is your take? What's the impact?
Well, yeah, first off, I think there's a very real chance the season could be scrapped. There's a report today that five or six Buffalo Bills rookies, they just tested positive for COVID-19. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see what the NFL does in retaliation to that. And the second part of that question, I think that is going to be a huge disaster for the draft. I mean, there's so many questions that have to be answered if that happens. How's the draft order going to shake out? Are you going to do a draft lottery like the NBA? Are you going to keep the same order from 2020? I mean, there's so many answers that have to be made if that does happen. And not to mention what it does for the scouts. I mean, you got to go back to 2019 and look at these players, and it just makes the evaluation so much harder. Does the NCAA, do they add some bowl games at the end of the year to kind of get these players out there to showcase what they can do? That's another big question. I think if that happens, I think all hell could break loose. I mean, there's just going to be so many things that have to be decided. It'll definitely be interesting to see what happens if that happens.
Gotcha. Jeremy, what's your take? What is going to happen if the NFL has to cancel the season? What's the impacts to the draft, in your opinion?
Well, I think Justice touched on a very interesting word in this whole thing would be evaluation. The previous evaluation models would be completely scrapped, if you ask me, because if there is no college season, if there is no NFL season, like you said, you're going to have to go back to this senior class, potential junior class, and figure out where these guys are going to fit in at the next level. The biggest thing the NFL is it's a projection league. They do not like to take finished projects or finished players from the college game and bring them up to the pros. They want to get a guy that still has raw talent and the potential to grow when they get to the NFL. Don't get me wrong. There are players that are more ready than others, but there are some that also have more room to grow than others. And I think that's a big part of the NFL's evaluation process is, can I get a player and turn him into an even better pro? Is his best football still ahead of him? I think that's a big question. But then the other thing you have to think about is, if you're an NFL team, I didn't get a chance to see what my rookie class can bring to the field. If they can't play, there was no live stats. I'm basically going to have 2 rookie classes coming in. And then Justice made another great point. How in the world do you figure out a draft order? Because I can assure you, a lot of teams don't want to go to the lottery system, especially the ones that are tanking for Trevor. So that would be a potential wrench in that strategy. But the biggest thing I'd say is just the evaluation process would be totally different, because there are guys in college that might be stuck with a certain round grade because they don't have a chance to improve their stock at all. Justice made a very good point again. Maybe there's a more emphasis on, Senior Bowl and other games that are going to bring more practice snaps and bring more to light the type of talent that's still out there. I'm guarantee you there will be a game full of juniors, because obviously there have been over 100 juniors declare for the draft for the last 2 or 3 years here in a row. It's a record number of juniors every year leaving to go to the draft. So you'd have to find a way to get them into a setting where you can see them go through a practice setting and see them play. So again, evaluation is the big word there. It would just have to be drastically changed if there would be no football season in the college level or in the pros. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but we will just have to wait and see.
Robert, what's your take?
Yeah, Roland. Just like Justice and Jeremy said, I definitely agree with both of those guys. But my take on it is that I think the first round of the draft is kind of already set in place. I think from right now, even if we don't have an NCAA season or NFL season, I think we kind of know, like, we have a idea of the top 25, top 30 players that's coming out. And I think that's not going to change as much. But just like Jeremy said, we happily have an uptick in early juniors declaring for the draft. I think we can possibly see those juniors, go back to school for their senior year. So I don't think those juniors can risk coming out early, not knowing what round they might fall in. But I think if you're a Justin Fields, you're a Trevor Lawrence. I think we've seen it earlier in the week with Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech. He said he opted out of the season for Virginia Tech. He said, but he has a first round grade on him. So I think we can kind of see those guys opting out. And I think the NFL, it won't be a necessarily impact on the first or second round guys, but the later rounds, the third, the fourth, and the fifth round, where you can't really evaluate those guys as much. I think that's going to be the problem. And just like Jeremy and Justice said, do we have a lottery like the NBA do? And if that's the case, then if you're tanking for Justin Fields, Trey Lance, or Trevor Lawrence, your whole world is just blown up if that's the case. And just to harp on the bowl games, I think the bowl games can be the best evaluation, because I think you can put those bowl games in a bubble. I think you can do the East-West Shrine game in a bubble. I think you can do the Senior Bowl out in Alabama in a bubble, and the PA Bowl out in Pasadena in a bubble. So I think you can kind of evaluate those guys in a bubble and kind of, limit the COVID-19 pandemic at the same time. Just like, we went out to St. Pete and we went to the East-West Shrine game this past year, and everything was pretty much in the bubble for the most part. So I think you can see an uptick in bowl games if it's no NCAA season or if it's no college football, NFL season. But yeah, so that's just my take on that, Roland.
Yes. Robert, one of the things I will say is going to be unique. And to your point, because a couple you have already mentioned, some teams are already projecting out for certain players. I think we all know Trevor is probably high on the pecking order. A lot of teams eyeing him. Not necessarily that they are tanking or going to tank their season, but maybe the effort from an administration standpoint just won't be there a whole lot because they are going to want to go after some of these guys. And whether or not they are able to get these individuals in a normal structured draft, maybe they do. If something changes to where we go to some type of lottery system, I don't think that's going to pan out well for a lot of teams. So once again, I think what we are encountering is this weird evolution of how executives in the NFL can actually handle a serious situation such as a pandemic, how it affects them from the player's health to organizational impacts to the economics of the game to salaries. And then when you go deep down into an organization itself, hey, now what is happening there in the organization? I know for a fact that there are some teams, they can't go to their administration offices to get work done. They're working from home. They're utilizing Zoom, so forth and so on. So we're seeing, this significant impact. I think right now the league is doing their best to get their arms around it. NFLPA is trying to get their arms around it. But I think this is going to be almost a tango with the players and their representatives and the league as a collective whole to try to make all this happen. So once again, what great topics, right? There's a lot going on. I think we could have topics for days because there are players who seem to cannot get jobs. We got teams that are doing some kind of hokey things out there. So having said that, it's that time of the episode to turn over the last word to you. So let's go out to New Jersey. Robert, the last word is with you. What's on your mind?
Well, what's on my mind, Roland, is a tweet that was sent out earlier by Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen sent out the tweet earlier this week saying he's better than half of the receivers that was on a certain type of list. And one of those receivers that he called out was Mike Evans. And Mike Evans kind of fired back and said, hey, you're not in my league. So with that being said, Roland, I just like to propose a question to you. I just want to hear your top 5 receivers that's in the National Football League right now. And I just want to, go on the panel and say, I just want to hear a top 5 from everyone on the panel right now, because I want to see if I'm scouting them, I'm watching film and I'm watching games similarly to you guys.
Wow, he just put me on the spot with the top 5. So I love how you did that, Robert, because by the time I finish mine, Justice and Jeremy will have time to figure out their top 5 receivers. So before I give you my top 5, you give everyone who are your top 5 receivers, Robert.
Top 5, Roland, I would definitely have to go with DeAndre Hopkins. And the reason why I would have to go with DeAndre Hopkins is because if you look at DeAndre Hopkins when he came into the NFL, he never really had an elite quarterback, but he always put up elite numbers. And then when he finally got an elite quarterback in Deshaun Watson, he kind of gets traded. So I would definitely have to go DeAndre Hopkins, number 1. Just his route running ability, just his hands, just his competitive drive. I think he has all the tools and toolbox as a receiver. So I would definitely go DeAndre Hopkins, number 1. Number 2, I would definitely have to go Michael Thomas. And just like I said, Michael Thomas actually has an elite quarterback in Drew Brees. But just unlike the other receivers that I'm going to put in my top 5, from an athletic standpoint, he's not the fastest. He's not the strongest, but for some reason, he always gets open. And he can't be stopped, even if you double team him. So I would definitely have to go Michael Thomas. Number 3, I definitely have to go to the freak, Julio Jones. He has it everything, Roland. He has the size, he has the speed. The only knock on Julio Jones is that he hasn't, seen the end zone that much. I normally have him in my fantasy league, and he gives me a whole bunch of points, but not a lot because he doesn't reach the end zone. So definitely go Julio. And number 4, I know this is going to be tricky for some people, but I would like to go Davante Adams out in Green Bay, Roland. Just his route running ability. And I know he's
Really?
playing with – yeah, I know he's playing with elite quarterback and Aaron Rodgers, Roland. But once again, I'm a huge Minnesota Vikings fan, and I've seen plenty of games where he just killed us one-on-one matchups, whether we're playing cover 2, whether we're playing zone. I think Davante Adams makes number 4 on my list. And then to round out number 5, Roland, I would definitely have to go with the Cheetah Tyreek Hill. Just his speed and everything he does for the Kansas City offense. Pretty much Patrick Mahomes can get him the ball. And he's just a game changer and playmaker, Roland.
Wow, that rounded out a pretty unique list. I will definitely tell you, there is no slouches on that list, without a doubt. You have a phenomenal list there. But I do have a question mark by one of your players. And you might be surprised on this question mark. Julio Jones. He doesn't get to the end zone, as you mentioned, a lot. So my question is that because he's just not getting to the end zone after he gets the ball? His yak is not great? Or is it because the quarterback is not great?
I'm a big fan of Matty. I'm a big fan of Matty Ice, Roland. I think Matt Ryan is an elite quarterback in the NFL, and I think majority of that I think early in Julio Jones' career, I think it was an emphasis of getting him the ball, whether it was in the short passing game with the screens, whether it was on the in rounds. But I think as he got older, I think the offense kind of tailored away from him. If you just watch the Atlanta Falcons game, they don't target him as much in the red zone. They became a running team with Devontae Freeman, especially when he got that big contract. And you have to think they brought in Mohamed Sanu and Calvin Ridley. So he kind of had a little bit more weapons around him. So I think that was one of the main reasons why you don't see him reach the end zone as much. But, I mean, he can still reach the end zone from anywhere on the field. So I just don't think they're really making him a focal point of the offense like they used to when he first entered the league, Roland.
Okay. So maybe I'm getting ready to give away one of my top receivers with this question. And this question is for the panel because I'm pretty shocked that Robert missed a fairly unique player. This player may have come out of Minnesota. This player may have some of the most phenomenal catches. This player, granted, he can be a hothead at times. He demands the ball, but I will say when he demands the ball, he delivers. 10 out of 10 times, he delivers. Who am I talking about?
Probably Stephon Diggs.
Help me here, Robert.
It sounded a lot like it sounded.
Help me here. So no Diggs on your list?
We remember, Roland, we said top 5 now. Don't get me wrong. Stephon Diggs is a Stephon Diggs is he's a hell of a receiver, Roland, and probably one of the better route runners that we have in the NFL. Just being able to stack on receivers, to run multiple routes on the route tree. I think he's one of the best when it comes to route running ability. But I think when you talk about the top 5, you're really talking about a special talent, someone that's going to actually, take over the game. And don't get me wrong, just like I said earlier, I'm a huge Minnesota Vikings fan, and Stephon Diggs delivered us the miracle in Minnesota against the Saints. That doesn't get him in my top 5 right there, Roland.
All right, so here you go, Robert. Here is R2's top 5 wide receivers. Number 1, might be a shocker, might not. But when I made the comment earlier about someone you can depend on 10 times out of 10, every time I see this receiver, without a doubt, he is money. No matter what the game, no matter what the climate, no matter what the condition. And that is Julian Edelman. Money, money, money. He's there. So
Wow,
now
Roland, really top 5?
I will have to go with you. My next one is Thomas. You cannot deny what he accomplished, especially this past season. The guy he made history. I mean, he was money, he was guaranteed, without a doubt. Now, when I say top 5, I'm talking about here and now, right? So let's keep going with this. I'm going once again, and I would have to concur with you, but with a question mark. And that is, I do believe Hopkins is a top 5 receiver currently in the NFL. I think none of us can disagree with that. That's probably one thing that we can all agree on. Now,
Why a
this
question
one
mark?
it might be a shocker to you. Oh, the question mark is because there are times where if you want to go deep down the field, stretch the sidelines, work the hash, he is your man. But there are times working across the middle, there have been times he's been questionable. So that's why I say that. Now, my next receiver, when you look at the way this receiver has played over the last couple of years, you've seen this growth, and then you've seen this, hey, dependability. Then you've seen hands, 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 and that is Thielen. The guy is just pure money. He gets the job done. Now,
Interested.
you will beat me up on the next one because you're going to sit there and you're going to wonder why in the world would R2 put this guy in his top 5? And I'm going to make the argument that he actually made himself, and that is Evans. The one thing Evans does that a lot of other receivers don't is when he separates. Now, there's a lot of players, they separate out of pure speed. The notion of speed gets them away. But the way this guy works routes, the way he works his hands, the way he gets inside leverage, the way he's able to work behind defenders, to me, he has come a long way, and he would round out my top 5.
Wow, Roland.
Top 5.
Once again, what I'm looking at in my top 5, I'm not just looking at the highlight reel playmaker. I'm looking at who is dependable money day in, day out, no matter the situation. And I think what you will find if you go back and look at film on those guys, no matter the condition or who they were playing against, they were money in multiple situations. Once again, if you needed them to go deep downfield, money. If you needed them to work the inside, money. If you needed them to sit in a cover 2 right between the quads, money all day, every day. Those are the type of players for me that really impact the game. Yes, you do have your highlight reel guys out there, but what I like is those true blue-collar workers, the true blue-collar workers that really get the job done. All right, Justice, over to you. Round out your top 5.
Okay. I just want to throw in my 2 cents real quick. You talked about you like the dependable, wide receivers, who can do it all, who can come up clutch. I respect that, but to bring up dependable and to not have the guy who has more tackles than drop passes than Larry Fitzgerald, I think you got to reevaluate that list. If we're talking about dependable, Larry Fitzgerald is as dependable as it gets. When you have
Very
more
true.
tackles than drops, that's just insane to me. But wow. I think we might have to devote a whole podcast to a whole episode to that list right there. That was interesting. But
To
my
say the
top
least,
five,
Justin. To say the least, that was very interesting list from Roland R2 Rainey right there.
that was legendary right there. Wow. um, but I guess my top five. Excuse me if I miss anyone. I haven't really prepared for this, but off the top of my head, definitely DeAndre Hopkins, number one. I mean, that man rarely ever drops a ball. He could do everything at an elite level, jump balls, 50-50, route running, all that. He can do it all. Number two, I would definitely go Julio Jones. I mean, you talk about size and speed. He has it all. He can do it all. He's produced from day one since he got in the league. Uh, that man is special. Probably number three for me, I would probably go. Oh man, number three. I'm blanking right now.
Well,
Um,
what you put Larry Fitzgerald on your list? You just made a great argument.
not
So I was hoping you put him on your list.
hey, Larry is great, but I don't think he's top. I don't think he's top five right now. He's great though. Man, I am blanking right now. You know what, Jeremy? Go ahead. I'm gonna finish my list at the end. I'm blanking right now. Excuse me.
This is great, Robert. Great job putting everyone on the spot. This is good stuff. What do you got, Jeremy?
You've all made very good points about why you guys have included guys on your top five. I'm gonna give you my top five, and I'm gonna put a little more perspective behind it, just because I've had a little more time to prepare now since I went last. But so there we have the most talented receivers in the league. We have the most clutch players in the league. We have the most all-around receivers in the league. And then another thing I'd like to point out is the slot wide receiver position is so different from playing the boundary wide receiver position. I want to give a special shout out to the slot wide receiver guys, because outside of Roland, there have not been many slot guys mentioned. Thielen got a mention, Edelman got a mention, and those guys normally play a lot in the slot because they just kill guys coming out of the middle. Guys just can't stay with them because they're so quick. But the biggest thing for me, Roland mentioned it, Justice, all of you guys have kind of hit on it, is the number one thing a receiver has to do is catch the ball when the game is on the line. So with that being said, Michael Thomas is probably my number one guy right now. He caught almost 150 balls last year. You can probably count on one hand how many drops he had. And then honestly, a close second behind him to me is Davante Adams. No one has played up to the level that Davante Adams has played for Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers these last few years. When the game is on the line, you just know that ball's going to Davante Adams. You know he's going to beat the guy with whatever route because he's a great route runner. And he catches the ball every time. He just has great hands. You just can't get around it. Those two would probably be my top two. I've always been a fan of DeAndre Hopkins ever since he came out of Clemson. Again, all three of these guys can do everything. They can play a little bit in the slot. They have the speed to get deep. They're not burners, but they can run all the routes. They have great hands. Those would easily be my top three receivers. Julio Jones comes in number 4. You got to give that guy respect. While he hasn't found the end zone, he has been Mr. Reliable down in Atlanta. He still gets 1,000-yard seasons every year. And Justice made a great point about this, or maybe it was Robert. I can't remember which one. There's talent around him down there, and he's had talent around him. He had Roddy White for a good portion of his career down there. He had a dynamic number 2 there. This past year alone, he had Calvin Ridley down there, as a second or third year wide receiver who was, I think a top 5 draft pick who came out. He's got talent. He's going to command the ball. Another thing to mention is there's a reason why Austin Hooper was made the league's highest paid tight end this year by the Cleveland Browns. He had double-digit touchdowns right there and proved to be a great red zone asset. So, well, of course you're going to utilize him down the red zone. Tight ends are kind of the biggest mismatch down there because you never know if they're run blocking or they're going out for a pass. All it takes is one step. You've got an edge on someone when you're a tight end sometimes. Number 5, I would have to go with Tyreek Hill. And it's because he brings so much to the Kansas City offense. That offense is built on speed. It is tailor perfected for him to have a Hall of Fame career. Now, number 5 can be debated all we want, but Tyreek Hill has come up big whenever they've needed him too. Had a little bit of a quiet Super Bowl, but I mean, he's been electric. The Mahomes to Tyreek Hill connection has been electric. Just as electric as any combination of young quarterback to young receiver over the years. And then real quickly, I'm going to throw an honorable mention in because he does deserve a mention, and we talked about him last week. If Antonio Brown is on a team, his pedigree, his talent, his work ethic, that automatically puts him in the top 5. But he's not in my top 5 right now because he's not on a team.
Wow. So this has been interesting, and I'm really going to give a major shout out to my colleague Robert for throwing this last word question that literally has taken out the rest of the podcast session here. But I love it. I love it because what it has done, it clearly allowed us to show the unique dynamics that wide receivers can bring to a team. You know, not every wide receiver is cut from the same cloth. They bring just unique dynamics. And to your point, Jeremy, and to my counter argument in regards to Julian Edelman, because I think him and Tom Brady have made it look so easy. I want you to do me some homework. Go and look at his stats. Just look at his stats alone. And I guarantee you, you might look up again and go, wow, that is maybe Hall of Fame worthy. The guy has been there for years. He continued to be there for years. Even in a kind of an ailing system last season, he was still money. And let's not forget that catch he made last year. Most receivers can't do that. Most receivers cannot do that. The guy caught the ball inches off the ground, not, a full arm length or, I was just diving and I caught it. He caught the ball inches off the ground without the ball touching. The concentration was just phenomenal. I only bring that up because we have brought up some very unique, dynamic players, and it truly lets you know that, the NFL, I believe, at least in that category, wide receivers is in a good spot for years to come. But before we round out this topic, we got to roll all the way back to Justice. Justice, you got 2 more for me?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm glad Jeremy went first because he pointed out a guy I missed. Number 1 is still DeAndre Hopkins for me. The guy just phenomenal in my opinion. Number 2 though, Michael Thomas. He was completely blanking. I completely blanked on his name. But Michael Thomas, the production he's put up over the past 4 or 5 years is something, I think he could only share with Antonio Brown. What they've been able to do, the production they've been able to do, it's insane. So he comes number 2 for me. Number 3, I'd put Julio Jones. Everyone knows what he brings to the table. I would put Devontae Adams at 4. You guys hit on it well. He is, he does everything well. I think a lot of people, kind of point to Aaron Rodgers and say, oh, he's only productive because he has Aaron Rodgers. But if you watch his game, he does everything so well. I think he really gets underrated. And number 5, it might be a little controversial. Over the past years, this guy has really flown on the radar, in my opinion. I'm gonna put Odell Beckham Jr. at number 5. You know,
I
I
was
think
wondering if he was
with-
going to get a mention tonight or not. Sorry, Justice. Go.
yeah, I definitely want to put him at 5. You know, I think a lot of people forget what this guy is capable of. You know, he could take it to the house on any given play. You know, everyone remembers the catch with the one hand. You know, his hands are some of the best in the league. I think a lot of people sleep on him, but he definitely should be mentioned. You know, he definitely should be on people's minds. You know, if we're talking about the best receivers.
Now, Justice, thank you for that round out. As you were talking about your list, and as I kept replaying Robert's list and Jeremy's list to include mine, I noticed something.
Uh-oh.
Oh man. Wow. Hey, Roland, you there? Hey, Roland.
Oh, shoot. We just dropped him.
Oh,
Ooh, we're
man.
dropping like flies here.
Wow. Wow. I'm really scared we might have to do this all over again. Oh my God.
Well, we're live, so.
Wow. Oh, we're live. Oh my God.
Justice, I thought you brought one interesting point while you and me are still on this here, is that I think it's pretty the most common denominator between the best receivers in the game right now that made up our top 5 usually had a high level NFL quarterback throwing them the ball. I would say that's the biggest reason why people sleep on Odell Beckham Jr. is because Baker Mayfield is still young. Still, you know, the Browns are hoping he's entering his prime. And I think that's a big reason why sometimes, you know, he gets left off the list. Why, you know, guys like Evans and Keenan Allen go back and forth at it is because they haven't always had the best quarterbacks throwing them the ball. But I think if given the right circumstances, you know, Evans is going to have Tom Brady this year. You know, how big of a leap can he make with a Hall of Fame quarterback, you know, there? And then Keenan Allen is going to likely have a combination of Tyrod Taylor and you know, potentially Justin Herbert throwing him the ball this year, where I mean, it could be conceivable that he's going to have a down year because he no longer has Phillip Rivers. So in general, I always think the top 5 wide receivers is a little bit of a toss-up because it's all about who's throwing the ball too. You know, the ball's got to get to them. They can't showcase what they can do if the ball's not getting to them.
Yeah, I think you made a great point. You know, Odell, you know, he's got Jarvis there. You know, he's got Baker, Nick Chubb. He's got so many other superstars around him. I really think that's probably the main reason why he's been overshadowed. And, you know, I want to highlight Keenan Allen. I mean, he may not be top 5, but he's probably top 3 in best route runners in the league. He is a phenomenal player. You know, he's so reliable. He gets it done. You know, I think a lot of people sleep on Keenan Allen. He may not be top 5, but I'll tell you, man, he's definitely clutch, and he does a lot of things right.
Well, it looks like we got our fearless.
Yeah, I think we're good now. So slight technical difficulty, but we're back at it. What I was getting at before the technical difficulty there was one of the things about the players that we actually mentioned is their quarterbacks. Their quarterbacks are Hall of Famers or potential Hall of Famers. And then you look at someone like a Juju out of Pittsburgh. You look at someone, as you just mentioned, Keenan. There are a lot of talented players out there, but they don't necessarily get the ball and have those big moments because they don't have the quarterbacks to actually help them do that. Michael Thomas, he has that in Drew Brees, right? I know I mentioned Edelman, he has that in Tom Brady. I mentioned Larry Fitzgerald. Ironically, Larry might be the one outlier because he's never had a legit good quarterback on the team. But what he has is his own internal fortitude and desire to get the ball. So I think it's unique the way our roster end up laying itself out, mainly because a lot of those players have those Hall of Famer or potential Hall of Famer quarterbacks, and then there are still talented players out there that are probably still trying to find a good match to their talents. So it looks like we are getting ready to finish up here. I want to go back to Jeremy and give you the last word. What's on your mind, Jeremy?
Well, I kind of want to bridge two topics we've already talked about. We talked about how the evaluation is very different here this offseason. If Joe Burrow would have not transferred to LSU at his senior year, he would not have been the Heisman quarterback. Bridging two topics right there with the transfer going in and getting an opportunity, and then using his senior year, you arguably from what most people thought would be a six-round quarterback, with the number one overall pick, and the memorable season, it would be a true tragedy if football did not happen, because there's a potential Cinderella out there who might not get to make his case and really vault himself into round one. Because Robert was saying earlier how while the first round is set, no one saw Joe Burrow go number one overall to shake up the quarterback.
Well, I know to your point, I actually agree. And I think this is where when you look at teams and you're scouting, general managers making decisions, you're trying to marry up talent. You're trying to find these marriages of talent and this chemistry that hopefully can catapult your team into something great. So what a great episode. Had a slight technical difficulty there towards the end, but I think this was a phenomenal conversation. A whole lot more to learn about this whole opt-out. And we will see. We will see what will happen here in the future with these players. So for Justice, Jeremy, and Robert, I am Roland Rainey, R2 Sports Management. We are looking forward to coming back to you next week with episode 8 here on The Extra Point. Have a great week.